On today's show, it's going to be a very unique one. Two Eastern Orthodox Christians are going to be defending the Western Church. To some, this might seem very controversial, but we're going to look at history, and in one particular part, the fall of the Roman Empire. When the Western Roman Empire fell, the military went away, the government went away, the police, the fire department, all gone. Academe, gone. When the Western Roman Empire fell apart, it fell apart. The church had to fill in that gap. It had to fill in the space. It had to fill in the void by the government. So when the Western Church started playing a more heavy role in Western civilization, it wasn't a coup or a takeover, but rather just they were the only group of organized people who could actually do something to keep some resemblance of civilization. I mean, God bless St. Patrick. Look at what those monks did, making the Book of Kells. I recommend look at the life of St. Patrick. It's amazing. But anyways, David Goa, what's your take on that particular subject? If the Western Church did not fill in that void left by the Roman government, would we even have a Western civilization? Or would it go into even more of a dark age?
Well, you paint a dramatic picture.
I'm just doing my job. Yeah.
When the Roman Empire fell, it was a great crisis.
Yes.
Not just for the aristocratic class, not just for the merchant class or for the military. It was also a crisis for the church because the church had a whole theology of the empire, a whole theology of government, and what you should render to Caesar. So, as you may recall, Augustine was asked to write an apology about this.
Really?
An apology in the ancient sense of that word, which is a kind of explanation.
Okay.
How could it be that this empire, which us Christians have a important place in, how could it be that that could just disappear? And of course he wrote his great book, The City of God and the City of Man, as a way of trying to help Christians understand what was going on here. So you are certainly what you're suggesting is largely the case, that when an empire collapses, there's a huge vacuum of leadership. And there is a crisis of security within that world. I remember you met my friend Heiko Schlieper, who was the iconographer, and he was a wonderful historian. He's a blessed memory. But I remember asking Heiko, who had a superb understanding of history, what it was like from the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, the Western Empire, until really the rise of the modern world.
Yep.
And Heiko made the comment that in much of Europe, in any village you lived in, you lived with at least a low-grade fear, because the authority structures were so thin that you didn't know who was going to come over the hill in the morning before sunlight and vanquish your village.
Yeah.
And there was nobody to call. There was no 911.
Yeah.
And so authority structures became so deeply compromised.
And I have heard the argument in sociology. If you look at feudal societies all around the world, it's people banding together for protection from other feudal societies.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I need to go to the local lord or the local knight to protect me.
Of course. and the local lord will have a walled home, a walled castle, and some of the people will get to come inside if they see the horde coming over the hill, if they find out quickly enough.
Yes.
But unlikely that all by any means will have that opportunity. So the structure that was set up that emerges from it is the most powerful lords in Western Europe become electors, and they elect what we call the Holy Roman Emperor. Now so there still is a kind of empire, but it's a very soft empire. It's soft in the sense of it's deeply dependent on all of the princes of Europe. They're the ones who, if they want to, will provide some knights for the emperor if the emperor is engaged in some military battle, for example. And you also have this issue of the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yep.
So you have both these spheres of authority. And for a fair bit of that time, these spheres were quite mushy.
Yep.
That is, they didn't really... There was a bit of a wrestling match about who had control over what and when and why and how. So but you wanted to reflect on some of the gifts of that period.
We're not going to deny, I mean, there were crimes against humanity done, no doubt about it. We're not going to sugarcoat anything. But we are going to focus more on the gifts in this particular episode. Did the Western Church, was it necessary, or was it a good thing that they filled that vacuum? Or if they didn't fill that vacuum, what would have happened instead?
Well, I'm not really terribly interested in speculating about what if.
Yep.
There are some things we can see, and see quite vividly.
Yep.
One of them we need to remember, and certainly Orthodox Christians need to ponder this. The Latin Church is called Roman Catholicism.
Yep.
There's a reason for that.
Okay.
The Catholicism, and of course the Orthodox Church also understands itself as Catholic. What Catholic means is that it has a kind of universality to it.
Universal, yes.
So both of them understand that. Now what does that mean? It means that the revelation that they are the guardians of, and to some extent the teachers and mediators of, the revelation refers to all aspects of human life. All aspects of the life of the person, all aspects of human life. And in some sense, all aspects of the cosmos. So both Roman Catholicism and the Eastern Orthodox Church understand themselves as being Catholic in that sense.
Universal.
Yes, the universal, not simply covering all times and all places, but covering all aspects of experience, having something to say about all aspects of experience. Now, the Roman part of this equation, as opposed to the Greek part in the Orthodox Church, there is a couple things about that. One is the gifts of Rome. The gift of Rome was law and bureaucracy.
Yep.
The Greeks, I love the Greeks because they're messy. You know, it's hard to get the Greeks to be bureaucratically clear. And so the genius of Roman Catholicism has a bit to do with organization.
Like you mean like the ancient Roman military?
Well, that's an example of it, but this is part of Roman culture. And so that didn't disappear, that remained there, and that became deeply ingrained in the Roman Catholic Church. That's why the Roman Catholic Church has canon law, which it updates periodically. And the Roman Catholic canon law is much more far-reaching than canon law in the Orthodox Church. Canon law in the Orthodox Church, it exists, but it doesn't have nearly as central a place.
Okay.
And also in the Orthodox Church we have the doctrine of the economia, the notion that even where the canons of the Church, or somebody's life or some issue runs up against the canons of the Church, it is still a responsibility of bishops and priests to discern what is pastorally best. Pastorally best doesn't simply mean applying the law.
Yep.
But in Roman Catholicism, it's much, much more vigorous than that.
Legalistic.
It's legalistic, but that's a gift.
Okay.
Sometimes I say that the best evidence for the significance of the Roman Catholic Church is the lack of order and organization in the Orthodox Church. You know, that the Orthodox Church has lots of struggles around hierarchies and around authority, and those struggles persist.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Roman Catholicism, those struggles have existed, but they aren't the daily diet. These are just two different ways, two different kinds of mindsets. The
Yep.
Greek mindset and the Latin mindset are distinct from each other.
I like the Greek way. To me, it seems more organic, more flexible, more fluid.
Well, that's always what us Orthodox people say, so that's why we're Orthodox.
Yep.
But there is
That's my preference personally.
But there is a genius in the way in which the Roman Catholic Church structures things and puts them together. Another aspect which is telling, that the Latin language and the Greek language, they sometimes dance together, but they sometimes have very, very distinct, different meanings associated with the words that they use for what they think is the same thing. So, for example, in the Orthodox Church we use the Greek word mystery
Mm-hmm.
for baptism, for marriage, for ordination, for confession,
Mm-hmm.
for dying. In the Latin Church they use the word sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the Latin Church has tended to be more vigorous. Again, this is also that legal part, more vigorous around how the sacrament is understood and how it's appropriated. Now, this has its gifts and it has its
Drawbacks.
can be abused as well, but that occurs all across the board here. I think one of the remarkable gifts of Catholicism comes about because it was Latin scholars that studied with Muslim scholars and learned Plato and Aristotle from Muslims.
Okay.
The Muslims had translated Plato and Aristotle into Arabic, and they taught the Western Church Plato and Aristotle. Whereas in the Greek Church, they always had Plato and Aristotle because they had the language.
Yeah.
So there's a very different sort of sensibility that developed. This also has a bit to do with the legal mind. So the Latin Church develops a very, by the time of Thomas Aquinas, an enormous development of dogmatic theology.
Mm-hmm.
It's very systematic. It's based on, with Aquinas, it was based on Aristotle's logic.
Mm-hmm.
It's very thorough. It's an enormous intellectual feat.
Mm-hmm.
That never happened in the Orthodox Church. Now, in the Latin Church,
Mm-hmm.
This theological cathedral that was built really became an enormous bulwark for the development of Western culture.
Okay.
It's a huge bulwark for the development of Western culture, whether you like it or not. And so Western letters ends up drawing from that a deep preoccupation with logic and reason, a particular way of understanding that, a deep concern to see that things are integrated and connected in our systems of knowledge. It's a remarkable achievement. So to me, that is another great achievement of the West. In the East, the preoccupation was with spiritual theology, a theology of the spiritual life. So that's quite different.
Okay.
Another gift in the West is that you had, for a variety of reasons, you had a much more dramatic separation of what we would call the secular clergy, that is, priests who hold office under bishops, and bishops rule over provincial or bishoprics, provinces or dioceses. You had a separation between the secular clergy and the monastics. Whereas in the Orthodox Church, that separation didn't occur in that trajectory or anything like that.
That's a pretty big difference, though.
It's a very big difference.
Yeah.
In Northern Europe, up through Europe, but certainly in Northern Europe, one of the effects of that during this period, and you referred to it in your opening remarks about the Book of Kells, is that monasteries became the petri dishes of Western culture.
Right.
Monasteries preserved the inheritance of Western culture through the West, and they also became the place where that was cultivated, the petri dish of Western culture. So the monastic world was deeply interested in letters, the philosophical and humanistic letters, and in the arts and things of that nature, and made an enormous contribution to the foundations, really, of Western culture. It's also the case that by the 12th century, it was in monasteries, in Western monasteries, the Cistercians, for example, that a new notion of the individual came into existence, which I think is part of the origins for things like human rights. It's also bears some responsibility for the kind of hyper-individualism that the modern world has developed, and which itself is I think somewhat deleterious. But the gifts of it, as they unflowed, were remarkable. But here's another issue that's so significant. The Latin Church underwent traumas which were different than the Eastern Church. Both the Eastern Church and the Latin Church had to deal with the rise of a new religion and of a new set of empires, which was Islam. Mm-hmm. But of course, Islam developed in the Orthodox world. So for many Orthodox Christians, when they saw Muslim communities develop, and even when some of their relatives became Muslim, they really thought this was just a kind of Christian heresy. Whereas the Latin Church, Islam didn't develop in the Latin Church, it developed in the Orthodox world. So the Latin Church saw the new Islamic empires coming to greet it, so it feared that. Mm-hmm. And I understand the fears. And we get the Crusades and all that associated with it. But then there's the big internal issue, which is the Reformation.
That's a lot of history right
there. And the
Reformation
is, of course, a movement within the Roman Catholic Church, a movement that saw itself as trying to purify the Church, trying to overcome what it saw as abuses within the Church, things of that nature. And when the Reformation hit, that's a huge crisis within Catholic civilization and culture. So when the Reformation hit, this is a profound internal crisis within Catholic culture and within Christian civilization. And as you know, it leads very quickly to the development of the nation state. I mean, that's the final death of the Western Empire.
The Roman Empire.
Well,
so you think
it's the inheritance of the Roman Empire, which was the Holy Roman Empire. So you have the development of nations and the disappearance of empire.
So the nation state was largely born out of Protestantism?
Correct.
Okay.
And the nation state as a whole requires then on the part of Christians a whole rethinking of their theology, their public theology, and their theology about the nature of society. Because the theology that had existed up to that time had been a theology that thought of the public world in imperial terms. That's why in the iconography and the paintings of much of that period in Christian culture, they paint God as an emperor. Well, now that disappears, and you end up having a whole nother way of, a whole nother blossoming, really, of Christian thinking in the West about the relationship of the church to the public sphere, to nation, and it has been going on from there right down to our own age. So my sense is that, I think Vladimir, of the church. I love the church. And I think that when we look at the great writers who have thought about the nature of the church, all the way back to the Apostle Paul, the church is manifest in a great variety of ways. We go to the Orthodox Church, we love the Orthodox Church for a variety of reasons. But of course it's easy for people to think that the Orthodox Church is the totality of the church. Just like it's easy for Catholics to say there's no salvation outside of the church, which they used to say, although they no longer do. Just as Lutherans would say this is the perfection of the church, or Calvinists, or Anabaptists, or evangelicals. But I think of it increasingly this way. And it comes really from a prayer we have in the Divine Liturgy. It's the invocation to the Holy Spirit, where we say, Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present, and fillest all things, treasury of every good and giver of life, come and abide with us too. To me, I think we need to think of the church not in denominational terms, because in fact the Orthodox have never thought of Orthodoxy as a denomination.
Really?
Nor have the Catholics. It's not a denomination. This is the true church.
Okay.
Denominationalism is a phenomena of the Reformation.
Okay.
So I think that Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism are both foundational, of course, to Christianity, and they are, I sometimes use an analogy, I've never played cards, but my sense is that they got virtually a full deck, both of them. The Protestant churches all developed somewhat more particular focuses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed
and then evangelicals more focuses as well, and Pentecostals and holiness movements. But I think we need to realize that each of these are manifestations of the presence of the Holy Spirit. We may wish that it was fuller in some cases than it is, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are not the ones who understand the full unfolding of the gift of the Holy Spirit in the lives of human communities. And we need to have complete respect for each way in which the church is manifest in our world. And the real issues for us in our world are not competing denominations or competitions between Catholics and Orthodox. We've got much bigger fish to fry than that. And we should get about doing it with real brotherly love.